Click, and that should be fine. And I'm back, but there's many different videos. There you go, that should be fine. So I just not talk for the moment and leave you to do everything then.
Fine where you are, yeah. So we're now live, we're streaming through. So did you enjoy putting together the presentation and the demos?
Yes, really, very much so. And I think we'll try to stop on the Solway coast, providing that everything is open and available, and we can do that because of COVID-19. But yeah, next week.
Great. Yeah, what a good time to come up.
Is it?
Yeah, well, it's just great that you're going to get a chance to come up, yeah, and see the raging seas in the winter and stuff, and get a real feel for it.
Oh gosh, yes.
The geese that are here as well, the Svalbard geese. They're really good.
I never heard about them. I really have to visit. Everything from the next PowerPoint is on the list of things to visit now. It really is just because you introduced me to the Solway coast that I fell in love with it.
Great. Have you got any interesting projects on at the moment?
A few. It's mainly planning events for next year and potentially some filmings as well, as digital media begin to be very developed. So for museums and support for heritage sites and things like that. So we shall do more of these talks or full-on demonstration in historical outfits and things like that.
Excellent, excellent. I was hoping to do some demonstrations at Malfault at 21. What do you think you might be able to do there?
Ooh.
Or what kind of
So
demonstrations
much.
do you do?
I always think about food, but it can be anything Roman or Romano-British. That's the interest, because the Mile Fortlet is right on the border, so you can talk about both sides of things, of course. Roman food, or what legions or what could have been prepared at the Mile Fortlet. But we do Iron Age hunting, so that crosses over with supplies for the Roman legions potentially. We have Roman blacksmithing, for example, following the army to repair mainly tools, actually, and a few things like that. Potentially some ancient butchery demonstrations, weirdly enough. And the usual, what people were wearing, jewelry, hygiene, basketry, textiles, a lot of different things.
Great. Right, we have quite a lot of attendees now, so we'll let's get started. So let's do a little bit of an intro. You okay?
Sure.
Right, okay. So welcome to Taste of Solway Historical Recipes webinar. I'm Anna from the Solway coast, area outstanding natural beauty, and this is Caroline, who is an ancient food specialist from Pario Gallico. Normally at this time of year, we'd be holding a conference to celebrate the Solway Firth, the culture and the heritage of the marine and coastal environment. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19 restrictions, we've not been able to get together in person, but we've taken this opportunity to come together virtually in a series of webinars. If you want to know anything else about our organisations, please visit our website. You can see some of the projects we've been working on. So we're running this session on a webinar function on Zoom. So as participants, your camera and video are automatically off, so feel free to relax. However, you can still participate. There's a chat option on your screen where you can post comments and observations to everyone on the webinar. Normally the icon's along the bottom of your screen. Just click on the icon, which brings up a separate window where you can add your comment. There's also a question and answers icon. If you have any questions for Caroline, please post those in the Q&A section. Some of these will be chosen and answered at the end of the talk. So please note this session is currently being live streamed and recorded. It'll be available in due course on the Solway Coast AONB YouTube channels. Okay, so it leaves me now to introduce our ancient food specialist, Caroline. It's when studying archaeology at university that Caroline became interested in its delivery to the public, making it accessible and entertaining, especially via living history displays and ancient crafts demonstrations. She developed a real passion for the Iron Age and the daily life of the normal people through history, far from the usual kings and queens or dates of battles that we are taught at school. What did they eat was the first question. Caroline has worked in several open-air museums in France and England and decided to create her own company, Pario Gallico, offering living history displays, food and craft demonstrations, and even ancient cooking workshops. Caroline now works for sites all around the UK, always explaining that from the early inhabitants of Britain to the more recent Tudors, nobody was eating only bland gruel and porridge every day of their lives, as the myth still goes. We'll hear more about that soon. After all, everybody eats, so what a better way to connect with such a distant past than to get a little taste of ancient recipes. So I'll now hand over to Caroline. Okay.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So hello everybody, wherever you are for the moment and whoever you are. Thank you very much for having joined this first talk, pretty much, on Zoom. It's very disturbing for me because I haven't done many live presentations this year, obviously. And you might have noticed I have a slight accent. I'm from France, Eastern France, very close to Germany and Switzerland. So I try my best to make it understandable. And if ever you have any questions about something I said and you didn't quite catch or quite understand, please feel free to just ask the question at the end. As Anna was saying in the Q&A section, I even raised a hand, virtual hand, because I can't see you for the moment. So for the moment, I will very cleverly try to share my screen and find, here you go, that to then start the talk. So here we go. It's all about ancient recipes and historic recipes along the Solway coast. As I was saying just to Anna, she very kindly introduced me to the Solway Coast AONB, and I have to say there is an amazing amount of history. Obviously, I had to choose, so we'll have a quick look. And I chose 4 sites, so 4 different time periods, and I asked online to many participants what kind of recipe they would prefer. So we'll have a quick chat about what is historical food about and what do I mean by actually historic food. What's my job usually? And well, I reveal nothing more, you will see. For the start, very quickly, some of you might recognize a few things there. It's the difference between the myth, the legend, and the actual archaeology and the history of food. What were people eating? Throughout history, it's actually sometimes very complicated to answer that question. I have a training in archaeology, so I usually work more from archaeological sources rather than historical books. But for this talk, I did a bit of everything. You might recognize, and I will move my cursor, my little arrow there, Asterix and Obelix. You might not know this comic, basically. It's not French, but we read it a lot in France. It's about Iron Age Gauls. And the big problem-ish that we have in France, usually with schools, but with everybody else, we all think that in the Iron Age, everybody was eating roast boar. It wasn't the case at all. Not in Gaul, not in Germany, not in Britain, not anywhere. A bit more potentially in Scotland. Basically, archaeology reveals that we have about 5, 8, maybe 10% of hunted animals compared to what agriculture was producing in the Iron Age, and very, very rarely boar. So I do apologize to, like myself, all the fans of Asterix's banquets. They didn't exist. Now, the medieval ages, I particularly like the myths that are about, and I usually go from the very higher classes and the lower classes. Once again, you might recognize these two, especially these guys there, very popular, even in France. I usually hear exactly this sentence. Oh, in these days, people only ate bland gruel or porridge every single day of their lives. That must have been grim. No, it's not the case. Again, if you eat gruel and porridge, it potentially is starvation facing time. It's not a choice. If you have the choice, as lower a class as you can be, you have an amazing array of vegetables, cereals, maybe way less meats. Cheese usually is called poor man's meat. You have fruits and you can forage. Also ask yourself the questions. If people, since the beginning of times, were meant to eat bland gruel and porridge every day, why would have we invented agriculture? Also, how do you make a porridge bland? I do love it personally, and it's really hard. You have to really insist on that. So no, once again, we have a very varied diet, even for the lowest classes in the medieval ages. Now, on the other side of the scale, a bit more Tudor here, and so don't look too much at the outfits. They're not very accurate, very historical, but they look quite fancy, so it goes well with the castle. And I have printed a quote just there that I found on this specific castle's website. The food is good, and of course, you eat with your fingers and a dagger. Plenty of wine poured generously throughout the meal. Mark that. Of course, you eat with your fingers and a dagger. Again, this is a myth, though it comes from certain Tudor manners, and Tudor, 16th, 17th century, isn't even late Tudor. On the table, you can see tomatoes, peppers, broccolis for any reason, because they arrive even later than these, pineapples. So clearly somebody there is has this type of idea that in Tudor times, we begin to know about the Americas, and the tomatoes and all these products actually arrive on the wealthiest table. It's true, they potentially would look a little bit different, but that's actually quite correct. But it's never ever correct to eat with a dagger. A dagger is a weapon, and you don't just eat with a knife, unless you're a shepherd, apparently. It was deemed very ill-mannered at the time. Yet, you could eat with your fingers, that is true. But when people say that, they straight away picture people ripping apart chicken or big pieces of meat and eating from the bone. No, in Tudor times, you are allowed to eat with the first three fingers, your thumb and your two first fingers, like that, with two other fingers, especially the pinky, in the air, to look dainty, to look polite, and you don't slobber on everything, you don't throw bones around the table. All that is part of Hollywood's myth, if you like. Now, if you have something liquid, sauces or soups, potages and things like that, you eat with a spoon, and the spoon is the one tool everyone, even peasantry, had. If you don't have a knife, you are deemed a vagabond, but everybody had a spoon, no matter what. Now, for the Romans, once again, very straightforward. Romans loved stuffed dormice and fish guts. Well, for this one, we'll see later that actually, yes, that is true. Maybe not in these words, but archaeology actually confirms that. So you can see this little very sweet fake dormice here, and this is a photo I've taken during the Pompeii exhibition at the Ashmolean Museum of Oxford. It's a jar, a very special jar that was made especially to breed dormice. So unfortunately, I didn't take a photo of the inside of that jar, but all these little holes are for air, obviously. They are bred inside and they are kept inside. So normally you have a lid on top and you have this little thing on the lip just there, a few along the sides, and you have a sort of run for them to exercise a little bit, all the way up to the top, and you have food or water left in these parts of the jar. So that absolutely, definitely existed. There might be a few finds actually of fragments of these specific jars in England, but if you want more information about that, contact Potted History, Graham Taylor. He makes amazing replicas of these, and I'm dying to actually get my hands on one. Now, for archaeology, we usually think about material archaeology, and I even have my little pot just there. That's a nice little Roman one, Gallo-Roman. But as you can see on the PowerPoint, for once I'm correct, we usually think about pots, pottery, metalwork, so knives, cleavers, pans, things like that. And we forget a bit about the much smaller, much more discreet side of archaeology that is, well, actually not often presented in museums. The top right photo, this one there, with these little beads of things, are actually an amazing presentation in the Latenium Museum in Switzerland, in Neuchâtel. And these are the remains of lentils, chickpeas, poppy seeds, and I think these are flax or coriander. I cannot remember this one. But the charred remains that have been found in this Swiss lake are actually just under there, and that's even pre-Roman, that's early Iron Age. And they compared with the modern versions of these ingredients. Burnt seeds, burnt stones for fruits and shells for hazelnuts. All of these are extremely important for archaeology and the understanding we have about ancient food. We also have art, not as much as I would like because I prefer working on earlier time periods, usually the Iron Age. But the Romans are very good because they record everything. And they also draw, well, they paint a lot. And for painting, they use a technique called fresco. And fresco is, when well made, pretty much indestructible. So 2000 plus years later, we end up with magnificent frescoes like that. You might have heard about Pompeii and Herculaneum, for example. And they portray everything archaeologists can only dream about. We have food, fresh food. So on the side there, for example, on the left, you have a bunch of asparagus in bundles. So you have ropes and that sort of things that are very hard to find in archaeological contexts. And you have these little baskets. And this is hopefully what I'm going to replicate or to buy from somebody who can make them better than me. They are little cheese baskets. We find pottery cheese molds in Roman context, but we don't find these ones. And they are usually made a bit like a normal basket. These look like a reed. It can be bulrush. Actually, you see there's little knots on the side there. That might be bulrush, but in any case, it is fresh cheese just straining, potentially outside there might be a window. And it's exactly the way you would do it now. So these things are amazingly important. And the last one, unfortunately, I can't really have photos of it. It's pollens. So I could have found some very nice microscopic views of pollens, but to know the environment, and there's so many more specific analysis that unfortunately I don't have the time today to develop. So new isotope analysis, for example, these ones can now tell archaeologists if in a pot something has been cooked or used that is animal fat, vegetable fat, dairy products, all these sort of things, fish, for example. So the archaeology of food is really being revolutioned by that. Between you and me, if this sentence, that last sentence was actually proper English, I'm really proud of myself. Right, so after the archaeology, it's what I do. And I don't want to bombard you with that. You can find many more photos, many more explanations on my Facebook page, Instagram, not really Twitter for the moment, I do apologize, and websites. But the idea is I chose to use living history as a medium to interpret archaeology that is sometimes quite complicated to understand and a bit, let's say, well, it can be a bit boring for some people. And I have to say, when a colleague a few years ago now walked through a museum with me and was extremely impressed by tiles and bricks and cases of them, I thought, oh, I'm so glad she's there to actually explain to me that no two bricks are the same. And there's a reason for her to be very excited about that. Because really, I wouldn't have stopped and looked at a good 30 different Roman bricks for any reason. And that's what I want to show. I want to make it accessible. I want to make archaeology understandable, enjoyable, and I want to be able to share that with everybody, any age. So usually quite a lot of children. So for example, on the picture on the right, it's me well, late Tudor outfit for the moment, probably telling a gruesome tale about somebody cooking in a kitchen in the Tudor farm. So this is Mary Arden's farm. On the left, this is my Iron Age outfit with reconstructed shoes and beds from Hallstatt and from Danish bogs and things like that. I usually run courses and workshops, and these days more and more. And well, for the rest, it's mainly talks, recipes shared online just to get people from their kitchen to have this opportunity to taste something that could connect them with such a distant history, a distant past. Any more questions? Feel free to ask at the end. And the Solway Coast, that's it. I didn't know about the Solway Coast AONB a few months ago, and now I see myself in a week going to visit all these 4 sites. So these are the ones I chose to decide what recipe I would talk to you about today. The Mild Fortlet 21 in Crosscannon or Crosscannon, I have no idea, I'm so sorry. 2nd century AD, it's a little fort very, very close to the western end of Hadrian's Wall. And that's not a big fort. That's a very important detail. There's not that many people, legionaries or auxiliaries, living in such fortlets usually. So that would impact on the type of food you could have got in such a place and made on site, or usually bought and traded with the locals. The second one, home comes from Abbey, 12th, 13th century, Abbey town. Beautiful building. It's an abbey. So now you hit the question of the difference between the food for civilians, for normal local people, if you like, and what kind of food would have been eaten and prepared or even produced by an abbey and monks. And that's quite an interesting difference usually. Now, the 2 last ones, the Salt Pans and Chili House Museum, are both 17th century. I couldn't choose really between the 2. I would love to visit both of them. So I chose Tudor and 17th century, so Jacobean recipes for this one. And for the rest, you have only the 40 plus people who took part in the decision of what recipes to choose for this talk to blame. Hopefully you won't blame them, and we'll start right away with the first recipe, the Mead recipe. I had a lot of questions, and actually we had a few discoveries along the way. I don't usually make mead. I have made some, of course, because it's not as complicated as you think. All this will be shared later on, but if you want to look at the recipes, please feel free to do so. Feel free to take photo, feel free to write them down. I will go a bit quick, I think, for you to write them down, but bear with me. So for this recipe, I had the bottle just there. There you go. So the mead is probably now ready. There's still a few bubbles in it, so it's still lightly fermenting, but I think about 3 weeks and it should be done now. Ideally, you want to flavor it how you like it. For this one, I went quite posh. If I take a historic recipe, I used black pepper and cloves, which are both my favorite spices. That must be a bit sweet, but quite spicy. Not to everybody's taste, so please feel free to use a recipe that uses products, obviously, that you like. Now, in that recipes, you only have to boil honey, remove impurities, add water, add the spices, reduce the volume, and put yeast in. Yeast has been the question. Now, here you go. These are the different stages. So from the top left corner up, to the last right. You have the honey. When you start boiling it, always make sure you don't overdo it because honey can burn, honey can caramelize. And you can play with that. You can give a really dark, deep flavor to your mead just because you overcook the honey, which sometimes is actually a really good idea. It also can can bubble quite high and get out of the pan and really ruin a cooker. So be very careful about that. You also have to watch out, so remove the impurities in that last photo on the top middle one. You see the difference in volume once you add the water. Remember, you are boiling some honey, so you are very close to caramel points. If you pour some cold water directly straight away in the pan, be very careful. Use a little bit of water at a time, stir it, add a bit more, stir, etc., etc. Otherwise, it might splash out, and that is extremely hot. Now, the middle, the central photo is really odd, but I used a chopstick. So you can use a piece of wood, you can use a wooden spoon or anything like that to measure the volume, the amount of honey, of mead to be made that I had in the pan. Boiled it a bit more and you can see the difference between what you have to remove from the pan, really, compared to the previous one when it's just highly boiling. Top photo again. This is what you get out. You don't really need to remove it, but it does help with the impurities. Now, using the chopstick, you can see actually when you will reach a quarter less of volume, and that's what you have to look for. Don't reduce it too much, otherwise it's going to be really sweet and you don't have a lot of volume, though you can top it up with more water afterwards. So that shouldn't be a problem. You can gauge it like that. And mainly at the end, last photo, leave it to cool down. Not completely. It has to be what we call blood temperature or body temperature. If it's too cold, the yeast won't activate. If it's too hot, you're going to kill the yeast. Let me show you what I used. These are the ones. I got a mead yeast and two, so Belgian ale and a German clear ale, so pale ale, really. Yeast. The mead yeast is made to tolerate quite a high degree of alcohol. This way you can have a fairly alcoholic mead. I used the Belgian ale because I wanted my mead to ferment really quickly. And that's the difference between having a mead way less sweet, way more alcoholic, but that takes quite a long time to brew. And I'm not very patient. So by using an ale yeast, the ale will stop the fermentation, will stop itself once you reach a specific percentage of alcohol in the brew. So that's why after 3 weeks, I probably have a mead there with all that sugar turned into alcohol, about 4, 5, 8, 9, probably maximum wine type of alcohol. So it's not very alcoholic at all. And that is the kind of yeast you would use in period meads. So that's a very interesting point that has been debated online. So feel free to have a look at the Facebook page for more information. The 3 other photos are just to show you the difference in fermentation. The first one is the one I took straight after I put the yeast and the mead in bottles. So you see very bubbly, very thick foam fermentation. The second one below is about 2 weeks, 2 weeks after that. So you see quite a thick top. Don't worry about it, but note that I didn't fill my bottles up to the top. Otherwise, it will overflow when it ferments, and you will end up with a very sticky airing cupboard, for example. The last one is the last fermentation. It has been taken a few days ago. So now the mead has virtually nothing on top. The foam disappeared and the bubbles disappeared as well. That's when you know the fermentation is pretty much stopped. One last thing. If you ferment something, do not screw the top on. You need the air You need everything that's produced by the fermentation to get out of the bottle, otherwise it might explode. So don't completely close the bottle, just leave it, I'll show you, like this. Very loose on the top, maybe 1 or 2 turns, and that is it. It will stay on top, but it won't explode. Well, it didn't. Just a little bit of advertising. If you are looking for very good meat that are, interestingly enough, based on archaeological finds, the Rookery Craft Mead. There you go. This is in Perthshire, not too far from where I usually go in Scotland. And it is wonderful. It's delicious, but also their website is absolutely full of information about the archaeology of mead. And they are working on a very exciting new project with the Orkneys. So I won't say more about that, but visit his website. Right, the second recipe, I'm so sorry if I go too fast, but I do go for it. Marzipan, Marchpane. That is, very surprisingly to me, the second recipe after me that people voted for. I do love it, but I despise modern marzipan. I really don't like that. And I think that's because there is a lot of almond essence in modern marzipan. Whereas this one is very light, very floral. And if you like if you like almonds whole, you will love this one. So even if you don't like marzipan, actually try it out. You might be very surprised. It's much more like a macaroon than what we think about. So these are different examples because this one is a marzipan that dries. So you will see after what I've been making a little, there you go. I don't know if you can see it. Marzipan, hard like this and not very thick, but this is now rock hard. So you can shape it when it's soft. You can then leave it to dry. You can put it in an oven, but I constantly burn them. So I decided not to, and they air dry really, really well. You just need to be a bit more patient. Within a day, they will be all right. So you can use stamps, you can use molds. I have there you go, a mold here that you can maybe see. It's a person. They are still used nowadays around Switzerland and Eastern European countries. Otherwise, the pottery stamps are anything you can find made out of wood or pottery. So that's the top one. You can shape them and you can gild them. So you can put gold on them. Now, these are recipes I did not quite fully use, but there's one from Cumbria. So I thought that's very relevant. And the other one is to make collops like bacon of Marchpane. Basically, you're making fake bacon out of marzipan. That's one thing for Tudor food, 16th, 17th century food, and medieval as well. People loved to have very flavorful, very tasty, delicious food that looked like something that it isn't. So, for example, bacon that's made out of sugar. You have mutton pears. There's a lot of mutton, but there's no pears. It's just meatballs, so lamb or mutton meatballs in the shape of pears with a sprig of rosemary on top. There's nothing funnier than eating meat that looks like a fruit. There you go, Tudor humor. So for these ones, it's always the same. It's very, very simple to make marzipan. I will leave you to read a little bit, but basically you need 3 ingredients. You need almonds, sugar, and rose water. It might sound different, but using rose water with that turns them into very light, floral, fruity, macaroon type of desserts instead of having the very pasty, glucose syrupy type of marzipan that we usually have. So for example, take blanched almonds and sugar, here you go, beat them into a paste, and when you have beaten them into a paste, roll them the thickness you want to make cakes, and cut them into square, edge them, so decorate the edges, usually with your fingers, and set an edge to them, and impress the edges, take rose water and beat CS sugar till it's as thick as pancakes. Pancakes, probably pancake batter or it is the thickness of an actual pancake. Good luck, food historians, to actually understand the recipes that are written in books, medieval ages, even Roman, all of them. They do not give you any indications about the amount of ingredients you need. There are some Tudor recipes where you genuinely read, take all the eggs you have in the house. It might be 6, it might be 24, doesn't matter, you don't know. So that's also food historians' job, to experiment and to find out what they would have meant. So the other one is a basic recipe. And you will be relieved if you are like myself and really struggle with scales and very precise recipes. It's all about volume. You have one volume, 1 cup of almond, ground almonds. You can ground them if you want by hand. 1 volume of sugar, grind them together, mix them, add rose water, a tiny drop, or if it's a big bottle of rose water, then just the amount of liquid. Mix a bit of water, make it into a paste, shape it. Shape it fairly quickly because it will dry. And in the summer, I have about 15 minutes to shape them before they are too dry to actually move. So in the winter, that's very good. Now you might have noticed that at the end of the slide there, I have written video available. I have a video to show you instead of doing a demonstration. It's about 5 minutes long, and it's for you to understand very clearly how to make marzipan at home. So very quickly, I will do something very technical, hopefully. There you go. And find you up what I want to share with you. Oh. Ooh. Bear with me, it is perfectly normal. There you go. I don't have a sound, so I will walk you through all the process there, but here's the video. So I hope this is working. Anna, please let me know if it's not. These are the ingredients. So you have white caster sugar that I will grind by hand. You have blanched white almonds, so the skin has been removed, rose water, water, and a magnificent pestle and mortar. Also a modern one because I prefer using the sugar specific mortar, the medieval one, for grinding sugar. It genuinely is a copy of a medieval one, and it works extremely well. But the modern one is to me better with almonds. So that's the kind of consistency. You can buy icing sugar instead of grinding it by hand. Unfortunately, Tudors didn't really have access to all that. Almonds, you can use flaked almonds, you can use whole like these ones, but here you go. There's always one jumping out of the pestle. Once you have ground that, you can also replace them by ground almonds. So that's the easiest way. Ground almonds, icing sugar, and you measure 2 volume, the same volume. So I'm trying to use a big full spoon of each for the moment. If you want to just try out making marzipan, you don't need much more than that. A bit more. I always end up using everything anyway. I'm not very good at measurements, so I would have been an excellent tutor, really. All that is mixed together, making sure the dry ingredients are very well mixed, because it's not adding the liquid that will actually help. It's what you do now. Rose water. This is my favorite one that you can find in many supermarkets, actually. A bit of water. I have 2 tiny teaspoons of water, no more than that. If you put too much water in, you then have to, you will see, add more sugar, more almonds, and you can choose what you prefer. I prefer when it's more a crunchier marzipan rather than a very sweet one. So instead of having the same amount of sugar and almonds, I just adapt a little bit and I put more almonds than sugar. But once it's coming together, you'll see, into a paste, and it detaches from the wooden dish, you're fine. This is the consistency you want. Not too soft, well, I mean, not liquid, but not too dry. You have to be able to shape it. Very simply, between your hands. So this one will be for a stamped decoration. A bit of sugar. It could have been spices powder. Icing sugar usually works the best, just to make sure that it won't stick at the bottom of that dish. So I'm going to use this pottery stamp instead of the wooden ones that I quite like. And this is my new favorite, a little goose. You can find them in special shops, or you can order them from a few craftspeople. If you use pottery, wet it. I usually leave it quite some time in the water. It absorbs all the water, so it shouldn't stick to the very sticky marzipan. Shouldn't, it didn't. There you go. Now I made another one, turned it into a little heart because I would like to show you the gilding process. So this is the blason, that's a French word, here you go. The coat of arms of the Shakespeare family in Stratford-upon-Avon. So that has been gilded, painted, and all the colors, all the gold is actually period accurate. So you can use charcoal powder, for example, for the black, beetroot juices, or sandalwood. It's a bit different. You can use modern food colorings at all. All of these are paintbrushes that you can use. So this is a goose feather paintbrush. The other one was horsehair. And you can use your hands usually, genuinely, but you can use anything you want to shape them. This one is a piece of reed, and it worked beautifully. And the gold, that's always very impressive when you do displays. I have real 24-karat gold leaf. You can find it in supermarkets, but it does look the part, and it does exactly what Tudor marzipan would have needed. Right, so I'm not good at gilding. This is just to give you a little bit of information. You might have noticed, and you might see it again, I use the paintbrush. I brush it on the back of my hand. That's to make sure it's dry, but it will also stick to the gold leaf. Here we go. That's an example of a cooked little rose. So like the one I've made before, but that has been in the oven and it browned a little bit, which wouldn't have been the best in Tudor times, but at least you could paint it, you could gild it to hide it a little bit. White sugar being highly refined, it's much more expensive. So anything with white almonds, white sugar is very expensive at the time. So very posh. Here we go. Fantastic. I will redo this incredibly technical thing again. Bear with me. And find my, here you go. Oh no. It's written in French and my brain doesn't work in two languages at the same time. After, I hope we're good for time. But after the marzipan, then we have medieval sweet and sour cabbage. And that genuinely, I would have never thought so many of you would have been interested in this recipe. But it arrived third, and it's before butter and whipped cream. That was really impressive. Anyway, sweet and sour cabbage. Because we always think about sweet and sour as a combination of flavors that only exist in modern times. Absolutely not. It's very medieval and it continues way, way, way later into Tudor and Jacobean times. The recipe you have on the side, a sweet and sour spiced rabbit, is actually one of the recipes I used But of course, instead of using rabbit, I used cabbage and onions. So the ingredients are on the side on the left. You see I used cider vinegar. I used black pepper, cinnamon, ginger, some currants, like in this rabbit recipe, a bit of cabbage and onions, and I eventually didn't use beetroot leaves, but they are excellent. They are a wonderful addition to that dish, or by themselves if you don't have spring greens or spinach. Two other recipes, and they are all these three recipes from the book, The Curry on English. This is how it's written in the medieval ages, and this is how it's pronounced. So the spinach, if fried, it's fried spinach, but probably more spring greens than spinach in medieval England. The caboche, it's a French word in pottage. So it is caboche, it means head. It's a cabbage. It's genuinely what we think about, maybe greener, a bit denser, a bit leafier than what we have now. These are all fried and used with spices. So all these three recipes turned into, I'm going a bit fast just because I'm a bit worried, but we can come back to it if you have any questions. So all of these have been turned into this dish. And that's because I've never done it like that. If you want to make sweet and sour cabbage or any other vegetables, but cabbage is great for that, you only use a bit of vinegar, a bit of sugar, and a bit of salt. That's it. So for such dishes, usually with just cabbage chopped finely, you can parboil it. So you can boil it, strain it a little bit, then put it in a pan with olive oil, with butter, with lard if you prefer. And you will use about 2 small tablespoons of cider vinegar. Malt vinegar works as well, but it's quite harsh on the acidic level. You can use brown sugar. I usually use white sugar because I would be that posh, shall we say. Also, I don't have the other one in my kitchen. And you have to make it how you like it. That's why I don't dare giving proportions usually, but say for 2 tablespoons, small ones of vinegar, you might get 2 teaspoons, maybe not even that, of sugar, and the usual 1 or 2 pinches of salt. But that combination for everybody is different. And you will reach this amazing point when you taste the dish actually, and it works incredibly well. If it smells a bit too vinegary, too acidic, add a bit of sugar, potentially a bit of oil or butter. If it smells a bit too sweet, taste it, add some vinegar. But there's that pinch of salt that will make everything work together. For this dish, as we had the spiced rabbit as well to include, the currants, the cinnamon, the crushed black pepper, and the ginger powder actually worked incredibly well. And all of this is quite light, so it cuts really well through sauces, gravies, or fatty meat. So if you have a Sunday roast, this is actually a sweet and sour cabbage that you can serve on the side. That's actually really light. Next and last but not least, and one of my absolutely favorite recipes throughout the whole of history, the Minutal ex praecoquis. It's a Roman pork and apricot tajine. I usually say tajine instead of casserole because it has incredible North African and Asian types of flavors. It sounds a little bit odd, but this is Apicius' recipe, so a 1st century AD or later rewritten author. Place in a pot oil, olive oil, garum, fish sauce, we'll come back to that, wine, usually white wine for me on this one, chopped dry shallots, chopped cilantro, cilantro is coriander, and pork shoulder cut into cubes and already cooked. That's a very interesting point. He uses meat that has been cooked already, and when you do that, I usually boil the shoulder of pork or the joint in a pint of water with a bit of salt, a few aromatics like a bay leaf or something like that, and you keep that stock to then reuse to cook a grain dish or a cereal dish to accompany this meal. So you never lose anything. Right. Then All this cooked with crushed pepper, cumin, dry mint, dill, moistened with honey, garum, again, so the fish sauce, raisin wine, very, very sweet wine, vinegar, wine vinegar, and some of its own juices to temper. It means what you just cooked the meat in, you reuse it in that dish as well. Add in pitted apricots. Problem. Now, Milefort led 21. Not easy to get fresh apricots up there. That's why for this recipe, I usually use dried apricots. And we know they were exported in Roman times up, at least up to Hadrian's Wall, because we have a few mentions even of black pepper on the Vindolender tablets. Maybe not for apricots, but I think some stones have been found in Britain in any case. We have also records of Roman fruits being preserved in honey instead of sugar, like we have syrups nowadays, and transported in pottery in jars and sent all across the empire. So we know they had figs, apricot, peaches, grapes, black pepper from India at the time that was sent to the northernmost borders of the Roman Empire in Britain. So my fort led 21, if you had the money, you could do it. Now you could also do another recipe that calls for apples, and that would be a bit easier. Right, then you let it simmer until everything is cooked. So it's very straightforward. Once you have all these ingredients, chop up everything, put it in a pan, mix it up, leave it to simmer. That's it. No more problems. But then he adds break-in tractor. So it's thickened, sprinkle on pepper and serve. Tractor is a type of dried flatbread, very much known by the legionary. You can make it really easily on very small stoves, so it's quite practical. You can replace it by Ryvita biscuits if you don't want to make something like that yourself. Or you can even add just flour. It's only to thicken the sauce a little bit. Now I put on the side the Roman 3, garum, wine/vinegar for this acid kind of taste, and honey raisin wine, that's for the sweet taste. Garum is the absolute Roman ingredient. There is nothing that screams more Roman food at you than garum. So it is fish sauce, and it has been known by other names. There's other products like liquamen or alec that are similar and come from the same production. But what you have to remember is it is the equivalent of Thai fish sauce or nam pla in Vietnamese cuisine. Why, oh why, instead of using salt in their cuisine, they decided to use fish entrails, whole small fish, fish heads, anything you throw away or that is too small for actually cooking with, or anchovies, for example. Why did they decide to use the salt and to salt and ferment these fish and parts of fish in the sun for months and months to produce that very savory, very salty liquid that is garum? There's a very good reason for that. You wouldn't eat Vietnamese cuisine or Asian cuisine without fish sauce, because if you replace it by salt, it just doesn't work. Garum is more than salt. It's a flavor enhancer. The very process of the fermentation of fish actually turns it into unami, so monosodium glutamate. That's what it is. In many recipes, in many ready dishes nowadays, you will find that mention monosodium glutamate. And that is what produces the unami flavor, the fish taste, the one that is very similar to aged beef, very ripe tomatoes and things like that. It has this depth. It makes every other flavor express themselves by themselves, but all together. So for example, garum, you will find it in sweet, in desserts, Roman desserts. For example, the patina of pears. So basically a sweet omelette with cumin, wine, honey, and pears, and a teaspoon of garum. Because when you cook it, the smell of fish, it's quite strong, disappears. The taste of fish is non-existent. And you will suddenly taste the cumin, the pepper, the honey, the wine, instead of tasting just a sweet omelette. You have to try it. I can't explain it more than that. You absolutely have to try it. Though, make sure your guests, your friends, or yourself are not allergic to fish. Always make sure of that. This is the dish at the end on the left. So this is what it looks like. I usually serve it with cereals. If you don't have the time, use semolina, use couscous. It wouldn't have been available as such in the Roman era, but it's a very quick, very easy alternative. I also wrote replica utensil for recreated dishes. This is a dish recreated and experimented with by different people. Everybody has different tastes. So if you go online and check out Tavola Mediterranea, Farrell Monaco's website, she is fantastic. She's one of the very best out there working on Roman cuisine, and she worked on the same dish. She really has she has a different take on it than me. I go for the simple route really, and what I like, and I prefer savory than sweet. So have a read of her website and see what you prefer. Replica utensils are extremely important in my work, and for this Roman dish that has been filmed for partly the Museum of London, the City of London, here you go, a few months ago, I had made replica knives, spoons, pots, and things like that. I will give you a list at the end of this talk of all my suppliers of such things, but there is an incredible joy that I at least experience when I use replica utensils that are made properly. It's not just looking, it's being. It's real pottery. They are unglazed pottery. The glass is blown glass. The bronze has been handmade. The wooden spoon, I made it myself. And the knives, I have a partner blacksmith who studies the very composition of the metals for me to experiment with how knives aged when you use them in historic kitchens, how you sharpen them, how you maintain them when they are not stainless steel. So that's all very much what I'm interested in. Now, I think, whoops, this is the recipe for this minutal, so pork and apricot, so, the one we talked about, the Roman one. It's quite a lot on an ingredients list. That's why I didn't send it to you beforehand. Don't be impressed by that list. You can change it a little bit. For example, I say use fresh or dried apricots. You can use coriander. If you don't like coriander, you can use mint. You don't have to use dill. But if you manage to tick all these boxes, the flavors are really incredible. It's really worth making the effort of getting all these ingredients. There you go. So that's basically the slide I was talking about. Thank you very much for listening to all this. And these are some of my suppliers. So Thomas from Big Bainan's Blacksmithing, a few of you might know him already. He's the one making all my replica knives from Iron Age. Obviously, as a blacksmith, you don't usually go before the Iron Age. I'm just looking for my Tudor one. Oh, he's here. Here you go. Up my Tudor knives as well, both cooking, eating, working knives, or when I do craft and I need specific tools. He's the one I will go to. The Roman bronze spoons has been made by Gareth from Sally Pointer and Gareth Riceborough. Check their website. There's so much on there, from handmade soaps, that's a specialty of Sally. There's so much. Just go and have a look. There is the most amazing. They are the most amazing things. For pottery, which is a huge part of what I need to actually experiment with. Potted history. So Graham Taylor is excellent. That I think he is the most accurate potter in the British Isles. Not that I know everybody, so I do apologize if you don't agree with me, but that I know of, in Britain, in the British Isles, he definitely is the most accurate, and his pots are absolutely fantastic. It's a joy to just cook in such things. And hot spots as well. And hello, if you are around. Same thing. I usually have to order to commission specific pots because I want to replicate some that I've seen in museums that I've visited. And she made me Danebury Hillfort Iron Age pots that are absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much for that. Glass replicas, I don't usually use them a lot, but I have glass beads, glass bracelets, and usually for the jugs and glasses, you have Mark and David, the glassmakers, and you have François et Chloé. They are French, les infondus, so the unmelted, as they call themselves. They make modern and also historic replicas, and they are very, very talented young people. As Anna mentioned earlier, I also give courses. I do workshops, not just about food, not just about butchery. We also do blacksmithing courses. I say we, it's Thomas from Big Bain's Blacksmithing, not myself. And very, very soon next year, paints and pigments, which is my second specialty. I usually work on pre-Roman wall paintings and pigment making and trading from prehistory up until Roman frescoes. So here you go at the Berrycroft Hub, amongst other places, you can find such courses and workshops amongst many other ones from flint knapping to bronze casting. So I do strongly recommend you to have a look as well. And of course, last but not least, the Solway Coast AONB, thank you ever so much for having contacted me and invited me to do this talk that I thoroughly enjoyed, and it has been an absolute pleasure to discover this part of the world that I didn't know about. And I suddenly discovered it was on my way to Scotland, so probably see you in about a week or two. So I hope you enjoy that, and I leave Anna to deal with the rest and the questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Caroline. So yeah, we've got a few questions come through. So loving your talk, which books, papers are your favourite on ancient food and cooking? I'm an archaeologist specialist in cookware pottery, and I'm always looking for works on the topic.
Oh.
You got any favourite books or that you'd recommend?
Books I recommend. So there's so many from different time period. If it's sorry, I just have it here. I did not plan that very, very well, but up this for say for starting with tasting the past from Jackie Wood, recipes from the Stone Age to the present, is very good. You will have recipes that you can follow in your own house, work in modern kitchens, and you have explanations at the beginning of each chapter, though you won't have many information about history or archaeology in this one. I find it's the best to start with because it will get you acquainted with the different types of flavors and type of cuisine that you have from different time periods. But if you want something more specific, then Jackie Wood wrote also Prehistoric Cooking. Excellent, a lot more informations, archaeological information, and I do recommend it, that's for sure, for say the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, etc., etc. Otherwise, for Roman food, my book is way too far for the moment.
More about the cookware, really. The cookware and the pottery was the specific question.
So, what was the question? Sorry, if you can repeat about the cookware.
She's specialised in cookware and pottery. So, any books particularly on that? Cookware.
There is a very good one that I cannot find easily. It's Prehistoric Pottery in Britain. And actually, if you have questions specifically about not so much the cookware, but the pots, ask Graham Taylor or have a look on his website. I think he has a bibliography specifically for that, or find their groups on Facebook. They are excellent at that. For the rest, for myself, I read a lot of archaeological reports, and I genuinely go to museums, see something I like, and try to find out. It's a bit like shopping. It's very odd to say.
Great. So you've got someone else. I'm very impressed with this talk. Very well presented. Lots of great information. I'm a forager and have been experimenting with wild spices in all sorts of things, including mead. I wondered if you were doing this as well.
Ah, I've never done it, but that is definitely something I would go for. Because I used black pepper and cloves for this one, but they are medieval spices, and I usually do Iron Age, and we know there are archaeological evidence, and quite a lot, for mead that has been made way earlier in history, well, in prehistory. I'm especially interested in the Iron Age and the Bronze Age. And if you go to the rookery mead makers that I shared on this talk, their bibliography and the explanations about that will give you a good idea of what you can read or what you can find about. As a forager, meadowsweet. Meadowsweet is incredibly present in any kind of mead in Danish, German, French, Britain kind of mead recipes. So that's a good one. Otherwise, I'm tempted by juniper berries and things like that. And if you want to be adventurous, a lot of flowers. I wouldn't go towards the wild garlic, but who knows actually. So that will be down to you. Angelica root has been used as well, apparently. And definitely, definitely meadowsweet. I'm from the east of France, so I would tend to use a spruce young buds as well, if it gives a few ideas.
Well, we get meadowsweet on the Solway, so that's perfect.
Oh, here you go.
What is the Saunders used as the colour in the marzipan?
That's a type of wood that is used to dye food. I it has other names. That's a very good question. I should have checked actually. But as far as I understand, it might be close to Brazil wood, and as well as being used for dyes and for dyes for food, it's not actually really, really good for you. Um, so now it's very hard to find, and that's why in some recipes they replace it by beetroot, but red beetroots slightly arrive in Tudor times. It's actually not an ancient vegetable. You can use red wine for a start. You can even sow ground almonds in it if you want to. You can use marigold petals to get an edible, very bright yellow. And if you are um, a bit higher in society, you can use saffron as well, very much. For greens, they tend to use plants like parsley, spinach leaves as well, so the juice of which you can use as a green color. And if you want a very bright green for marzipan, there are recipes to use copper oxide that you can find on copper pipes outside. Don't do it, it's terrible, it's very bad for you. And some recipes call for urine as well, and you really don't want to go this way.
Oh, Caroline. So we've got an interesting comment from Christine Slater, one of our volunteers. Absolutely fascinating. I love this talk. I used to know someone who was carbon-14 dating pollen grains to reconstruct ancient diets. And I knew people in Bristol who were using isotope techniques to reconstruct ancient diets. That's unbelievable, isn't it?
That is fantastic. It's exactly the type of new technologies applied to archaeology that is the best, because they are real things. And you're very lucky, well, in Britain in general, you might have heard about Must Farm, the British Pompeii. So it's a bit further, it's in Cambridgeshire. So it's a bit not the same way, but it's the first time I actually see a site producing a pottery pot, a whole one, complete, with the food still inside, the meal that they were cooking, and a spoon stuck in it. That never happens. It happens in Pompeii and in Herculaneum, but that is the most amazing, undoubtedly find you can ever get. And it is a nettle stew. I don't know anything else about it. But with isotope analysis, you can now know what has been cooked in which pot. So we could go as far as knowing if that kind of shape, for example, has been used for dairy, has been used for storage, or anything else. And that's something I would love to look deeper in. But for the moment, I get very, very busy and interested in pigments and wall painting. It's terrible.
This will have to be our last question. So have you ever made a version of marzipan with other kinds of nuts or seeds? I'm allergic to almonds and would like to try to make some with coconut or coconut flour, but I
Ooh.
don't know if coconut or other nuts absorb different amounts of sugar in rose water.
That's a very good question. And I do believe that there are online at least recipes of marzipan using something else than almonds for that very reason, because a lot of people are actually allergic to almonds. I've never tried myself, but I don't see why, for example, hazelnuts, if it's all right, wouldn't be bad. Coconut, when it's dry, it might be a little bit too dry, in little shavings, but ground coconuts, potentially, that would be delicious, actually. Otherwise, any type of, it's complicated because if I say Brazil nuts or things like that, they might be handled in places that handles almonds as well. So have a look online. Unfortunately, I can't answer, but I don't see why it wouldn't work as long as you have the right amount of icing sugar in it.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you, attendees. It's been great. I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. I'm making my own marzipan now. It's my Christmas cake this year. So we'd love your feedback. The email address can be found in the Eventbrite reminder, info@solwaycoastaonb.org.uk. You can also use our social media channels on Facebook and Twitter. We have a few more coastal conversations occurring in the new year. We'll be discussing dynamic dunes on the 25th of February, and there's more to follow. We'll put together the recipes, some of the lists that Caroline spoke about, and some of the people Caroline spoke about as well, and we'll send them out to the email registered in your Eventbrite account. Okay, that's everything. I hope you've enjoyed it, and you can join us next time. Thank you very much, guys. Bye now.